because we're not doing our jobs as Jews to try to act with the conscience that Hashem gave us to lead the world. Welcome, guys, to the next lecture in the series of The Rabbi and the Skeptic. I want to thank all you guys for coming out on a busy weeknight. I want to start by thanking the Elitzur family for sponsoring tonight's event and hosting. Thank you always for your wonderful hospitality. And tonight's event is hosted in honor of Baruch Elitzur's 85th birthday. So thank you so much. Now, those of you who have attended the Rabbi and Skeptic series before know that I like to talk about positive things, happy things, and anti-Semitism is not a very happy topic, but I was consulting and asking around, and people felt that it is the elephant in the room. And I don't have to tell you this, but since October 7th, anti-Semitism has spiked significantly. In the United States, it's jumped over 300%. Most of you guys are seniors and going on to college next year, and I need not tell you that there's going to be a lot of challenges in anti-Semitism on college campuses. So I felt, although it's not the happiest topic, it's absolutely appropriate and important to talk about. And it's going to be a different type of lesson than what I think you're used to, because people hear all different types of explanations and reasons for anti-Semitism, but very rarely do people hear what the Torah has to say about it. And it's very clear that anti-Semitism is so crazy and it is so abnormal, both in how long it's been going on and how universal it is, that it's got to have something to do with something beyond the natural and into the world of the supernatural. And if there's something supernatural about it, then Hashem should be the one that we turn to find out what is the real reason for anti-Semitism and what is the purpose of it and what should we be doing about it. So tonight's lecture is entitled Anti-Semitism, Excuses and Reasons. Now I put a semicolon over there. I felt that worked. Okay, so the first thing is, let's define the difference between excuses versus reasons. People give all types of excuses, but they're not really reasons. Excuses means I didn't do my homework because my dog ate the homework. That's an excuse. The real reason I didn't do the homework is because I'm lazy. So excuses is I need to justify it somehow, so I find the justification. Now, there is a very, very popular Jewish historian whose name is Dr. Ken Spiro. And he identified that basically there's a total of 7 excuses that have been given universally for this crazy hatred, this long-standing hatred of the Jewish people called anti-Semitism. And he breaks it down into the following 7 categories. Number 1, the Jews are scapegoated. Now, what is a scapegoat? A scapegoat actually comes from the Torah, the idea that a goat was sacrificed on Yom Kippur, was thrown over as to expiate for sins that it didn't commit. So the idea of a scapegoat means like someone's being blamed for something they didn't do, but for other people's troubles. So the Jews have been blamed for other people's troubles when the economy is not going well, when there isn't peace in the region or different issues. The Jews have always been blamed. Okay, that's one explanation. Another explanation is the Jews have been wealthy, control the economy, right? The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a best-selling book which talks about the Jews controlling the world's economy, etc. And of course, we're not liked because of that. The third excuse is because the Jews don't mix in. Now, does anybody know in Tanakh who used this excuse for Jew hatred because the Jews are not assimilating into our culture?
Was it Haman?
Haman, very good, excellent. This is exactly what Haman said to Achashverosh when he asked for permission to annihilate the Jewish people. Haman says, "Yeshno am echad mefuzar mefarah bein amim v'dateim shonot mikol am." There's a nation which is scattered amongst the peoples and their laws are different. So he uses that excuse. The Jews look different, they dress differently traditionally, so they don't mix in, and people tend, our nature is to dislike people who are different than us. Number 4 is deicide. Deicide means that many Christians believe that the Jews killed Jesus, and then therefore we're responsible for that. Deicide means the killing of a guide. So we're responsible for the killing of Jesus. The fifth one is we're chosen people, and therefore we feel we're better than other people, and nobody wants someone feeling superior to them and stating that they're superior in any way, shape, or form. And so that's reason number 5. Number 6 is race. Hitler mentioned this. They felt that the Jewish people are an inferior race, and he came up with this concept of the Aryan race is really the supreme race, and the Jewish people are an inferior race. And the last one is Zionism, the state of Israel, because of the state of Israel taking other people's land, taking over Arabs' land, etc., etc. So Jewish people are hated because of taking the land of Israel. So these are basically all the 7 reasons that Jew hatred will fall under. However, we'll see these are all excuses. These are not really reasons. And the way we know that, Dr. Spiro explains, is because none of these are universal, and all of these fall off, and there's still hatred when any one of these falls off. And nobody suggests that it's all of these reasons, what the Jews are such horrible people, that all of these reasons apply to them, and that's the only reason why they're hated. So let's show how he debunks each one of them. I'm just going to go through it pretty briefly. So these are his rebuttals. Now you could watch his videos on YouTube, or he has a website, and you could get this more in depth. But basically, I'm going to go through a short synopsis of some of his rebuttals. So as far as the scapegoat excuse that the Jews are blamed for other people's problems, which has happened, the Jews have been scapegoated, but that itself is not a reason, because why were the Jews chosen to be the scapegoats? You could choose anyone. How come the Jews over the years have been the ones, that we're such horrible people that we have to be the scapegoats and blame us on everything? Number 2, if it's because we're wealthy and control the economy, well, before World War II, before the Holocaust, there were Nuremberg laws which prevented Jewish people from opening many different types of businesses. And most Jews in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe as well were dirt poor at the time. And still, anti-Semitism spiked. So there are many times throughout history where Jewish people were not wealthy, or certain regions where they weren't wealthy and not successful, and they were hated just as much. Furthermore, he says that if we were wealthy and powerful, we should try to get our favor and not go against us. Usually when somebody is very powerful, people try to become friends with them, not to try to hate them. The third one is maybe the issue is that we don't mix in. So after the French Revolution, at the end of the 1700s and the beginning of the 1800s, so the Jewish people mixed into European culture much more. And they started having all types of rights in France, and then in Great Britain, Jews started being allowed to vote, and eventually with Napoleon, they were allowed to be soldiers in the army, they were allowed to have government officials, as long as they mixed into the society and they didn't stay separate. So actually, anti-Semitism did dip for a little bit of time. It went down. But then, 100 years later, you had something called the Dreyfus trial. Anyone ever heard of that before? The trial of a totally secular Jew. He was not observant, and he was framed and blamed for being a German spy, and France did not like Germany at all. And he was completely accused falsely. They later found the real culprit, and he was barely punished at all. And at the Dreyfus trial, there was a man named Theodor Herzl, who you've all heard about, right, who had this idea that he needed to build a state of Israel to get rid of anti-Semitism. And he came up with this idea when he was at the Dreyfus trial, and he heard these people saying death to the Jews. Not death to Dreyfus, not because he's a spy and he's going against our country. They were saying death to the Jews, and this was a completely assimilated Jew. It had nothing to do with not mixing in, because he was completely mixed in. So we see that this reason falls off too, and it's just an excuse. Deicide, we kill Jesus. Now, first of all, the scriptures in the New Testament say several times that it was the Romans who are responsible for the killing of Jesus. And a later pope even said as much so that there were a few Jews who were involved in the story, but it was not at all the Jews who were responsible for that. It was the Romans. And what happened to the Romans? The Romans got the Catholic Church named after them, the Roman Catholic Church. And the Jews were blamed for it. So this itself is an excuse. This can't be a reason. How come the Romans weren't blamed for it? Okay. Furthermore, anti-Semitism got worse farther from his passing, because the worst anti-Semitism was in the Middle Ages in Europe when you had all types of pogroms. Why wasn't, if it's because Jews killed Jesus, why didn't it spike 2,000 years ago when Jesus was killed? How come that usually the farther you get from an event, the more you forget about it and the more okay you are with it. But over here, the farther from the event, the more anti-Semitism spikes. So it doesn't really fit, doesn't make sense. Chosen people. There's many cultures who think they're chosen. The Chinese think they're chosen. The Japanese think they're chosen. The Muslims think they're chosen. Different cultures say that the Jews originally were chosen, but they're no longer the chosen people. There's groups of Christians who believe that God switched it and then he took you. The Christian people, the Muslims believe that. So one of the cultures he mentions even calls everybody else, the word for anyone but themselves are monkeys. Okay, that's how they believe they're chosen. So the Jewish people are not unique in being a chosen people, and furthermore, the concept of being a chosen people is more a responsibility than a privilege. It's a responsibility to be role models for the world. So of course there are privileges that come along with that, and you get a special relationship with Hashem when we do what he asks, but it's more a responsibility. Race. Well, Hitler considered the Jewish people their own race, but we're not a race, we're a religion. The Jewish people come in all sizes and colors and textures. So we accept converts from any other peoples, are welcome to join, whatever color they are. So the Jewish people are not a race, because a race means that you're of a uniform type of heritage. And we accept anybody as converts. And the Jewish people, if you go to Israel, you'll see Jews across the spectrum. Okay, Zionism. So, definitely there's a lot of anti-Semitism blamed on Zionism, but Arabs had many chances for peace, and if it had to do with land, I'm sure you guys have learned about in your senior class the UN partition plan, 1947, where there was a plan to divide, a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. They had every opportunity, many times, and Ehud Barak tried again. Different prime ministers have tried. They weren't interested in taking land for peace. And furthermore, there's other people who took the Gaza Strip. The Jordanians and the Egyptians also took land, and there was no revolts against them. So therefore, all these are excuses to try to justify something that you want to do anyway. And so what we have to do is get to the bottom of what's the real reason. What's the real reason? And we're going to attack it by looking at what Hashem himself says. This is so abnormal, so supernatural, that there has to be something beyond the normal explanation for this. So let's take a look at a few sources in the Torah. Now, the Jewish people are in the desert in the book of Bamidbar. They're traveling for 40 years through the desert on their way to Israel. And whenever they would travel, so there was a cloud which would lead them, and then they would take the ark. They would have to take apart the vessels of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, and they would take the ark, and they would travel. And whenever they would pick up to go from one camp to another, the Pasuk tells us that Moshe would say a tefillah. And we say this tefillah, may be familiar to some of you, we say this tefillah when we take out the Torah from the ark. So it says, Vayhi ben Soah Haron, when the ark would travel, Vayomer Moshe would say each time, Kuma Hashem. Now obviously they're going into enemy territories, land where people were not appreciative of their coming in the desert. And so Moshe would say a prayer for protection, Kuma Hashem, rise up, V'yafutzu Eivecha, and spread out or scatter your enemies, V'yanusu misanecha mipanecha, and let your enemies be scattered or flee from before you. Now there's a grammatical problem with this pasuk right away. The Jewish people want to protect themselves from whose enemies? Their own enemies, right? Protect us from our enemies, from people who hate us. But that's not what it says. Before they would travel, Moshe would constantly say, Hashem, scatter your enemies. May those who hate you flee from you. Why are they focusing on Hashem's enemies if it's their enemies they want protection from? So take a look at the Rashi, which is the great medieval commentary, most popular commentary ever on the Torah. Rashi says, those who hate you, why is Moshe saying those who hate you, Hashem? Those who hate Israel. It means those who hate Bnei Israel, those who hate the Jewish people. For anyone who hates Israel, really hates the one who spoke and the world came into being, which is a fancy way of saying, if they hate Israel, they really hate Hashem. That's really what they're after. And so Moshe called them your enemies. As it says, those who hate you have raised their heads. Who are they? They plot deviously against your nation. So the war against Israel is really the war against Hashem. Why then do they take it out on us? Why do they take it on us of all people? Why not the Eskimos? Are there still Eskimos? Not sure. Why don't they take it out on other people? Why us? Yes, Mr. Eitan.
Because we're Hashem's people?
Because we're here to represent Hashem. And they can't just take a ladder and stab Hashem. That doesn't work. And so they take it out on those who represent Hashem. Now, why would people hate Hashem? Why do people hate Hashem? What does that mean, they hate Hashem? So you see that in history. Think about history. Why do people hate religion, hate Hashem? Because Hashem represents accountability in this world. And people would much rather be free and not have accountability. And so they hate it. You don't like it when a teacher admonishes you, reprimands you, tells you what you have to be doing, and gives you accountability. We all want to be free. And so whether we say it or we don't say it, instinctively inside of us, everybody hates authority. And the greatest authority in this world, and all authority, really comes from there being a God. All moral authority comes from there being Hashem. And so there have always been, since the time of Amalek, people who hated that, and they take it out on the Jewish people who represent that. And we'll soon see that Hitler says this straight out. Over here, where the Jewish people were taking revenge on a plot of the Midyanim at the end of the book of Bamidbar. And Hashem says to Moshe, saying means tell the Jewish people, Nikom nikmas b'nei Yisrael mi'es ha-Midyanim, take revenge of the Jewish people from the Midyanim. And then when Moshe repeats this, Moshe says, over here in Pasuk 3, Moses spoke to the people, arm from among you men for the army so that they can be against Midian, carry out the revenge of Hashem against Midian, the revenge of Hashem. And it doesn't say the revenge of the Jewish people. Once again, Rashi pipes up, and Rashi says the revenge of the Lord for anyone opposing Israel is reckoned as opposing the Holy One, blessed be He. That's really what they're out for. That's really what they're after. Everything else is just an excuse. And we see this over and over again. I want to show you the book of Joshua now. I'm going to go to the book of Joshua. I'm sure many of you have studied the book of Joshua, where the Jewish people enter the land of Israel, which is promised to them. And there are 31 battles in the book of Joshua, 31 different kings. And of all the battles, they were victorious in every one of them except for one city of Ai. They lost the war of Ai because somebody had sinned and had stolen, and the Jewish people should have admonished him, and they didn't, and so everybody was held responsible. Whatever it is, they lost the war of Ai. When they lost the war of Ai, Yeshua says a prayer to Hashem. And in his prayer, he says the following. Yeshua says in his prayer, he says, Mata l'shimcha hagadol. Hashem, what is going to be with your great name now that we lost this war? What does it mean, what's going to be with your great name? The commentaries explain that Hashem's name is attached to us, Yisrael. We're representing him. If we are not victorious, then it's in a sense as if Hashem's great name has been attacked. And therefore he prays, Hashem, for the sake of your name, forget us. For the sake of your name, please let us be victorious in our next military battle. And so he's saying it's Hashem himself who they're going after when they attack. And now I want to show you who says it more explicitly than anyone else is Ramban, Nachmanides. Toward the end of the Torah, it talks about, in the prophetic song called Ha'azinu, it talks about prophecies of the end of days. And it says that Hashem is going to avenge all those people who made the Jewish people's lives miserable, which is a lot of people. So it says, I will raise my hand to heaven and I say, I live forever. This is Hashem talking. When I will whet my flashing blade, whet, W-H-E-T, means like I'll sharpen my blade, so it's going to shine. My hand lays hold in judgment. Vengeance will I wreak on my foes, will I deal to those who reject me. So Ramban, Nachmanides, immediately pipes up and says, what's going on? Why is it saying people who are fighting against me, wreak on my foes, those who reject me? I mean, these people never attacked Hashem, they attacked the Jewish people. So look at what Ramban says. The reason for their punishment is that they inflicted all these evils upon us out of their hatred for the Holy One, blessed be He. All right? Because they do not hate Israel for having made idols like theirs. They hated Israel because we rejected their idols. So obviously what they really hate is Hashem. Okay? So instead, they serve the Holy One, blessed be He, and observe His commandments, neither intermarrying with them nor eating of their slaughterings. And they, Israel, hold their idol in contempt and remove it from their places, similar to what Psalmist says, etc., etc., etc. So Nachmanides is saying the reason Hashem is taking it personally and is calling it His enemies is because, let's think about why they hate the Jews. They hate the Jews because the Jews are rejecting their idols. So what they really are upset about is that we are rejecting their idols and we serve Hashem. So what they really hate is Hashem. They really fought against Hashem himself, and that's what the Pasuk tells us. And so now, that we understand the real idea behind anti-Semitism, I would like to pose a strong question, a contradiction. Let's take a look, and you'll see that Hitler says exactly this idea. He wasn't hiding anything. He said it straight out in his evil book, Mein Kampf. He says, I'm freeing men from the restraints of an intelligence that has taken charge. That means I feel restrained. There's a certain morality in this world that is restraining us, that is not allowing us to do everything we want. That from the dirty and degrading self-mortifications of a chimera called conscience. A chimera is a type of monster, okay, called conscience and morality. And from the demands of a freedom and personal independence, which only a few can bear. So he's saying, I'm here to free the world from morality and conscience. I don't like morality and conscience. He says it straight out. And look at the second quote. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a mutation like circumcision. Right? He says the Jews inflicted two wounds, a physical wound, circumcision, and a moral wound on the world by giving us a conscience. There is no such thing as truth, either in the moral or in the scientific sense. There's no such thing as absolute truth. And so that Hitler says that's what I'm fighting about. It can't be any more open. He says it straight out. What he hates is the conscience that the Jews are bringing into the world, the morality, which is what Hashem represents. So, however, we're going to now present a contradiction to this. There are two sections in the Torah known as the Tochacha. The Tochacha is the section known as rebuke. And basically, in the book of Vayikra, and then again in the book of Devarim, the Torah says, if you will listen to my mitzvot, I'm going to give you great blessings, peace, and the crops will grow, and rain in its time, and everyone's going to prosper, and things are going to be great. If you don't follow my commandments, and you don't do your job as the chosen people, I'm going to give you a message, and I'm going to let you know that you need to change. And so, before we read these psukim, I want to ask you guys a question. If we just got finished saying and showing in multiple sources that the people hate us because we represent Hashem, then they should hate us most when? When we're doing the mitzvot and doing what we're supposed to do? Or when we're not doing what we're supposed to do? When should be the greatest hatred? What do you guys say? When we're doing the mitzvot is when we're representing Hashem. And if they hate Hashem, that should be when they hate us, and that should be when they attack us. However, we're going to see Hashem says the exact opposite. I'm going to unleash nations against you, specifically when you're not following the commands, when you're not following the Torah. So let's take a look at the Tochacha, the section of the rebuke. Obviously, this is from the middle of it, but if you do not listen to me and do not perform all these commandments, this is from the book of Vayikra, I will set my attention against you, you will be smitten before your enemies will rule over you, you will flee, but no one will be pursuing you. The bottom line is the enemies are going to be after us, we're going to be so nervous and scared, even if no one's running after you, you're going to be scared. I will scatter you amongst the nations. I will unsheath the sword after you. Your land will be desolate and your cities will be laid waste. When does this all apply? If you're not listening to me, says Hashem. He's going to send us these harsh messages, including anti-Semitism and the nations who have brought us so much trouble. I don't understand. But if they hate Hashem, why would they attack us specifically when we're not doing what we're supposed to do? They should attack us when we're doing what we're supposed to do. That's what they really hate. Let's look at the next section of the Tochacha from the book of Devarim. It says in the book of Devarim, also a section on rebuke, all these curses will befall you, pursuing you and overtaking you to destroy you, because you did not obey the Lord your God to observe the commandments and statutes which he commanded you. Therefore, you will serve your enemies, from whom the Lord will send against you, when you are in famine, thirst, destitution, lacking everything, and he will place an iron yoke upon your neck until he has destroyed you. The Lord will bring upon you a nation from afar, from the end of the earth, etc., etc. So, the Tochacha, the sections of rebuke, clearly say in the Torah, Hashem uses as a punishment, so to speak, many different things. One tool of which he uses the tool of anti-Semitism, that the nations attack us. But why would they attack us and pursue us when we're not doing what we're supposed to do? I thought they hate Hashem and they only hate us because we represent godliness. That's when we do what we're supposed to do. How do we explain this? It's a big question. So I want to present for you guys two approaches to this, and both approaches are really leading in the same direction. I'm going to start with introducing a concept called midah keneged midah. Anyone ever hear of that before? Measure for measure, which basically means the way you act is the way Hashem will treat you, so that you can get a lesson, you could get an education from how you are being, what's happening to you. You see, oh, okay, this is the way I'm acting. Okay. So the Mishnah tells us in the book of Sotah. Sotah is about an idolatrous woman who behaved immorally. So it says that, we treat her with the measure that a person measures, that means the way a person acts, he is measured with it. For example, she, the Sotah, this adulterous woman, adorned herself to violate a transgression, right? She got herself all dressed up. So, when she was immoral, God therefore decreed that she should be rendered unattractive, that when she comes to the temple and to have this whole ceremony, so she comes in a very unattractive way, etc. She began her transgression with her thigh and afterwards with her stomach. Therefore, the thigh is smitten first and the stomach afterwards, and the rest of her body does not escape punishment, etc., etc. The bottom line is, the Mishnah teaches me that divine punishment is tit for tat. Hashem punishes a person or rewards a person in the same way they acted, so that it should be an education for us and we should try to learn from it. See some other examples. This is an example that the commentary Tosafot says. Tosafot is a school of 200 rabbis from France and Germany. And it brings a pasuk which says that, let's say somebody killed without witnesses. Somebody murdered without witnesses, so they're never going to be punished if nobody witnessed it. So Hashem may arrange, it says in the pasuk, Hashem will arrange that somebody who murders without witnesses will be underneath someone who falls off a ladder, and therefore it's going to end up that they're going to get their just decree anyway. And it explains over there that it's tit for tat. Just like they murdered by doing something in a downward motion, throwing someone down, so too something will fall upon them. So this is the concept of midah keneged midah. What does midah keneged midah tell us? It tells us, when it comes to the nations of the world, they are a reflection of us. They are a mirror of us. And so it's true that what they really hate is Hashem. They hate Hashem and they hate godliness and they hate the conscience, as Hitler said. But the way it manifests, the way Hashem sends anti-Semitism, is they're a reflection of how we are acting. And so when we're not keeping the mitzvot, what they're going to say is what we are really saying. And when Hitler says, I hate the conscience, it's because we're hating the conscience. Because we're not doing our jobs as Jews to try to act with the conscience that Hashem gave us to lead the world. And so both are true. It's true that they really hate Hashem. But that's because but when they come, they're coming and they're speaking in a way that we really speak. It's a reflection of us. And so our treatment is a reflection of our own behavior. Our treatment is a reflection of our own behavior. Midah keneged midah. So when he says, I hate the conscience, it's because the Jews have to use that for introspection and say, are we acting with our conscience right now? Now I'm going to tell you something really, really wild that one of my rabbis once told me. There's so many Holocaust deniers out there. How could there be Holocaust deniers? There's museums filled with evidence of the Holocaust. We still have thousands of people walking around with tattoos on their arm. We have the hair, we have the shoes, we have documents uploaded onto the internet from Germany of everything they were trying to do. How could you have Holocaust deniers? And the answer is that everything is a message from Hashem. It's all a message from Hashem. When we deny the Holocaust, then they deny the Holocaust. How do we deny the Holocaust? When we deny that it was a message from Hashem, as the rabbis were saying at that time, they were saying that people were greatly assimilating in Western Europe, which is where it started from. And we were losing our own sense of morality, and then when it happened, people didn't look and say it's a message from Hashem. We gave all the other excuses for anti-Semitism. So Hashem says, if you deny me, then other people are going to deny it. It's a reflection back to us. And this is a concept which is very foreign to a lot of people because you don't learn this stuff in schools. But this is the way the rabbis looked at it. These are the messages the rabbis took from it. There's a book called A Divine Madness, written by Rabbi Avigdor Miller, which is completely devoted to showing the midah keneged midah, the tit for tat, through the Holocaust. What the Jews were doing and the messages that Hashem were sending it, okay? You could get that book. I wrote over here, A Divine Madness. A second approach. Second approach is as follows. So we know that when Yitzchak was very old, he was about to die, he gave a blessing, Isaac gave a blessing to his two children, Yaakov and Esav. Now he was deceived. Yaakov knew that he was really the one who deserved the blessings, and he gave it to Yaakov. And then Esav comes in, cries, and says, don't you have any blessing for me, any blessing left? And so Yitzchak, Isaac says to his son Esav, and Esav represents the nations who are anti-Semites, because Esav always hates Yaakov. Okay, the Talmud says, Halacha Esav sonei Yaakov. It is a law that Esav hates Yaakov. It says, okay, you're going to live by your sword, and you will serve your brother, that means you're going to make this world a better place for your brother, so your brother can fulfill his job in this world, your brother Yaakov. But it will be that if you grieve, the word in Hebrew is kasher tarid, if you get depressed, then you can break off his yoke from your neck. A yoke is like what's put around an animal to hold a burden on top of it. It's the ropes that hold the burden. So Yaakov is really going to be the one in charge. I want Yaakov in charge of this world. I want the Jewish people to be the models in this world. But if you get depressed from it, you can break it off and it's okay. Now what does that mean? When does that apply? So Rashi says over here, tarid is an expression of pain, depression, like yeridah when a person goes low. When the Israelites will transgress the Torah, and you will have cause to grieve about the blessings that he took, so you will break his yoke. What that means is, Rashi is telling us, a person doesn't get depressed when somebody else is successful and they deserve it. You might be jealous of somebody else who's successful. You might be envious. You might want to be like them, but you're not going to be depressed. Depression is when somebody gets something who doesn't deserve it, and I deserve it. Esav, nations of the world, when the Jewish people are not fulfilling their role and therefore they don't deserve the blessings of Isaac to lead this world and they don't deserve it, then you get depressed and you get to remove your yoke. And what they're really angry about when they say we hate the conscience is they're upset that the Jewish people have this special conscience and morality but are not using it. That's what they're upset about. That's when they get depressed and they say, okay, then you're not using it, we should be on top. So it's specifically when the Jewish people are not doing their job, they come along and they say, we hate the conscience, we hate Hashem. What do they mean we hate Hashem, we hate the conscience? What they mean by that really is that we're okay with it as long as you deserve it and you're doing your role. Our role is to lead the world through morality. But when you don't do your role, that's when we have a problem with what their real hatred is. Why did you take the blessings? Then we deserve the blessings. And Hashem says, when that happens, I will give them the power to throw off the yoke of the Jewish people and they're going to be on top. And that's what's going to happen. So the common denominator behind both of these approaches is that anti-Semitism is a message from Hashem. Yes, they say we don't like the conscience, but that's because the Jewish people aren't using it properly. Specifically in those times when the Jewish people aren't using their conscience properly, then Hashem gives the power to the Goyim through anti-Semitism, and as we saw in the Psukim before, Hashem says now they're going to rise up against us. And although this is like a very foreign concept to a lot of people, because this is not typically what people learn in school. Typically learn in school all the other excuses for anti-Semitism. But this is the way the rabbis have always seen it. And every single year in the summertime, we have the saddest day of the year called Tisha B'Av. You ever hear of that day, Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is the day that we not only mourn the destruction of both temples, but we really mourn every single tragedy that has happened to the Jewish people, one day a year. And we read a book there called Kinot, the Kinot. And what is in the Kinot? The Kinot is filled with not I hate them and I hate them and I hate them and why did they do this to us, why did they do this? It's filled with introspection. What are we doing? What can we do better that Hashem will bring us peace? The whole thing is saying we did this, we did that. It's introspection. It's the time for teshuvah. And so our reaction, of course, this doesn't legitimize the horrible anti-Semites and all the horrible things they're doing. Of course, they're totally 1,000% responsible for what they did. As we saw before, Hashem says in the end of days, they'll get their punishment. Don't worry. This does not legitimize anything. But and we should go to war and we should defend ourselves and we should absolutely, take revenge and do whatever we have to do to them to keep ourselves safe. Of course. But our primary job as a Jew, the way the rabbis always took these messages, our introspection, are to look at what could I change about myself? What teshuvah should I do? And so when we read about anti-Semitism, yes, we should say Tehillim, and we should try to think about military tactics, but equally as important is that we say, let me look at a book of halakha, let me look at a book of Jewish law, and let me see what I can improve in myself. I can't fix the world, but I can fix myself, and if we all try a little bit of halakha, of Jewish law, then the world will become a better place. Bezrat Hashem, we should all have peace. Thank you guys.